Welcome on in, golf fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with our DFS and betting preview for this week's Genesis Invitational. Gonna get you guys ready for all of your exposure. With first off, a look at the golf course, which are heading back to Torrey Pines and the South Course. Gonna go over some of my modeling, my key stats and comps that I'm using to identify my top plays. And then afterwards, gonna get you ready for all of your exposure with my DFS core plays, values towards the bottom to save some salary, as well as my outright betting card for this week. So by the end, you'll be an expert on what to expect from this course, as well as a few pieces of exposure that I'm considering you might want to consider adding to your card yourself. So without further ado, let's go ahead and hop on in. But first off, look at that modeling and our key stats out there for Torrey. We had the opportunity to see this course a few weeks ago, but it's going to be a little bit different here this week. They've gotten some rain over the last week. They're expected to get some there on Wednesday and Thursday as well. So expect it to be a little bit more receptive, and at 7,800 yards, it's going to play even longer than usual. So while the model is going to be very similar to what we had at the Farmers, there are a few things that are different. So in terms of your approach profile, a lot more emphasis from 150 yards and above, and because we don't have that North course in play, because one of the first two rounds was at the shorter 7,000 yard North course, we had to account for that with our proximity buckets. So we've taken things, skewed them a little bit more towards the longer iron spectrum. Off the tee, it's even more so about your driving distance. With the wet conditions and less rollout off the tee, this course is going to be a real big hitter's ballpark. So while we were already looking at driving distance, carry speed, clubhead speed, all of that sort of stuff, I've ramped it up even more for this event. Par 5 scoring is where you're going to make vast majority of your birdies around here, so being able to pick those off is always a key. Bogey avoidance, a little bit less important this time around, but still towards the top of my model there at number 4. The reason why it's a little bit less important would be with the higher green regulation percentage, which I think is going to come along with those softer conditions. And while it might be a little bit more of a test off the tee, if you're dialed in with your second shot, you are going to have a better chance at holding these firm green complexes, or at least historically firm. Might not be the case out there for this event. Your putting comes down to some form over the last 24 rounds, but also your POA baseline and POA from 4 to 12 feet. That, of course, was taken directly from the Bet the Number model, something that they were considering and really worked out well over there at the Farmers. Around the green, a little bit less important this week than what it was for the Farmers because of the more receptive greens. But your comp courses, I've got the same 3 from last time. That would be Quill Hollow, Muirfield, and then the major championship conditions. But I also added in the API as of this morning because it's going to be more receptive. Down here in Florida, it's always a little bit more receptive than what we usually see in California. But with all the rain that they're expected to get, it's going to play more like what we have there at their Arnold Palmer. So hopefully it gives you a good idea for what to look for in players. A lot of this, of course, like I said, came from the Bet the Number model. So if you're looking to make your own model, make sure to check them out. Use code Gsluke when you're signing up. And if you're over there on my Patreon page, which you can join down in the description, you can also find my exact model weightings and plug them in over there on their site. And now to take those key stats in our modeling and translate it into some of our exposure. So we're going to start off with our core plays towards the top, and the only one that I didn't go out there and bet outright is going to be Scottie Scheffler once again, who was up there in the top 3 heading into the back 9 yesterday and then completely fell apart. I mean, I'm talking one of his worst stretches of 9 holes that we've ever seen in his career. So while he only finished top 25 at the end of the day, in reality, his form was a lot better than most people would give him credit for. So if people are gonna, take a lower ownership stance on him now that he had the quote-unquote bad week, then I'm going to buy that dip, particularly because he's only $12,300. I thought he'd be $13K in a field like this, especially with how strong that 6 and 7K range is, but they gifted us there with another $12K Scottie Scheffler, which I would argue is far too cheap for the kind of upside that he brings, and he is the number 2 player in my model. I do have Rory McIlroy just a little bit higher in terms of my modeling, but a lot of that is because of the form recently. I mean, Rory's coming in off a win. You're talking about a player on the DP World Tour that also dominated there in that fall stretch. Scottie Scheffler doesn't have nearly as much recent form, and most of his form is coming from higher level events compared to guys like a Rory McIlroy. So I think a lot of people are going to choose to take one of those two up top, and I think the studs and duds approach in general is going to be extremely popular, whether it's a Scottie and then another one of these studs up top, and then sprinkling down down there in that 6 and 7K range, or going with a Rory McIlroy and then another elite tier player, I think is going to be extremely popular. So really the one way to get different with these two players up top would be to avoid them altogether. If you don't want to take a Scotty or a Rory in lineups, you're going to be leveraging against at least 40% of the field. I would imagine 50 to maybe even 60% out there in those large field GPPs. So, it's the kind of week where I think you're going to see a lot of people jamming in these guys up here. My personal favorite would be a Scotty Scheffler, and the reason for that is the course fit. You're talking about a course in Torrey Pines that is the ball striker's paradise, where if you gain strokes off the tee and you gain strokes on approach, you could win with almost just that alone. I mean, we had guys like Luke List win here, a lot of terrible putters winning over the last 5 or 10 years that almost entirely did it with their approach play and off the tee. And because it's going to be a softer version of Torrey Pines, that rough is going to be especially penal the first few rounds. Guys that are elite tier drivers, both in terms of their distance and their accuracy, get a massive bonus this week. So that's why I prefer somebody like Scotty over a Rory. Rory has the distance advantage, but Scotty Scheffler is the more complete driver of the golf ball. And if you take a look at the last 12 measured rounds, it's not like he's been a slouch when it comes to the ball striking, where he's gaining 1.8 strokes per round. Now, Rory, the reason why he has the advantage over there in my model is he's gaining 2.1 strokes per round, but a lot of that is because of his distance gains off the tee. So I think you're going to see at a major championship type of venue, it even out a little bit. To have that precision really being a priority around this golf course is just why I prefer him up here towards the top end of the board. And if you take a look at some of the form around the Farmers, neither one surprisingly has played all that much golf, but Scotty Scheffler did have the top 10 finish back in 2021 when they played this in terms of the US Open. So that was a year where it played a little bit harder. The rough was more lush, which might be the case this week with all the rain that they're expecting. It's just another data point that supports a Scotty Scheffler play. So I'm not betting him out right there at like 4-1 on a lot of the books out there. Last week I was able to grab Scotty live at plus 1,000. So that one, of course, was when he had a little bit of that slow start, but the same kind of thing applies. If he starts 1, maybe even 2 over par through his first 9 holes again, I'm going to go out there and take a splash on an outright. But at 3-4-1, it's just far too low of a number for me to invest on. So we're going to take some more long shots there towards the bottom end of the board. But in DFS, top 5 bets, top 10 bets, something I'm going to consider out there with Scotty this week because it is a perfect course fit. You're talking about a course that rewards his best skill set. And while he doesn't have maybe the course history that he had at the Waste Management Phoenix Open, I would argue that this is an even better setup out there for the big guy. Next up, we've got our first outright of the week, which is going to be Ludwig Aubert at $9,800. I bet him to win this event at the Farmers before he had the flu, and felt like a genius through 2 rounds. He was out there leading the golf tournament, and then, of course, his flu game took him down. Ended up having to withdraw from the Pebble Beach Pro-Am. That's how bad the flu got to him, but now he's had some time to go out there and recover, and that's the huge X factor here because Ludwig Aubert before that looked like an absolute world beater at this golf course. He's the kind of guy who's got the off the tee accuracy and distance to get the job done, which is very similar to a Scotty Scheffler. Scotty kills it at major championships because he keeps himself in play and sets up wedges into holes. Ludwig Aubert is going to get that same sort of advantage. So a lot of this comes down to the health. He's got to be more healthy at this point, but you're thinking a young 20-year-old kid after 3 weeks of being sick is more than likely going to be 100% at this point. So, if you took him at Pebble, you bought in a little bit too early. I got destroyed on some of my showdown lineups that week because of that withdrawal, but at the same time at $9,800, I love the upside, especially large field GPPs where we're trying to get a top 3 or a win over here in the 9K range. He has all the equity in the world to do so. If he's healthy, he's going to be lower owned than he should be, and compared to some of the other guys around him, I think JT is going to get some attention, Morikawa as well. Heck, I even think guys like Matsuyama and Cantlay are going to come in higher owned than an Aubert because of the uncertainty, and long term, he's one of the best course fits that we have here. I mean, Aubert was mega chalk when he played this event just a few weeks ago. Didn't have the injury concerns, of course, but he should be better now. And if anything, I think he deserves that same sort of respect. So if you take a look at the last 12 measured rounds, they're not going to be as impressive as you'd hope for because of that flu impacting things, but he's still gaining out there with his off the tee and approach play. It was more so the short game that ended up giving him the most trouble. So he's the kind of player that I'll buy the dip on, particularly because he's only 25-1 out there in the outright market. Our last core play, our second outright bet of the week out of 5 that we're playing, is going to be I almost said Shane Lowry. It's Jason Day there at 40-1. And J-Day has some of the best course history imaginable with multiple wins around Torrey Pines. So that came at the Farmers. He's also played really well at major championships around this golf course. And at $8,700, he's a little expensive for sure, but I think that's going to keep the ownership lower than it should be. I was getting ahead of myself, but guys like Shane Lowry are going to be popular. Top 10 recent form ranking out there for guys like Shane Lowry, but even Russell Henley and Jordan Spieth, after his getting into contention at the Waste Management, I think might be the same, if not slightly higher ownership than a J-Day. And if people want to forget about the Torrey Pines history because we're playing the Genesis Invitational here, then I'm going to buy the dip on that as well. So if you take a look at some of the shots gain metrics, they've been really solid out there for a J-Day. He's gaining off the tee, gaining close to a stroke per round out there with his approach play, and surprisingly losing about a half stroke per round putting. Now, historically, POA has been his best surface out there on tour. In fact, he's about a third of a stroke better per round than his 24-round baseline, which is a whole lot better than his last 12-round baseline. So if you go back to the last 24, right, he's at least gaining strokes out there to the field. But if we compare his baseline to his last 12-round base stats, it's a nearly a stroke better per round that he's putting over here on POA. So I would expect him to be a lot better when it comes to the greens this week. And at a golf course that he's historically been fantastic at from tee to green, I think it's a perfect spot to take him in DFS. Partially because the ownership will be lower with a lot of the other plays around him. And, you know, throw in Pendrith, he top 10 at the Farmers a few weeks ago, by the way. Tom Kim with his really good ball striking form lately. Just, there are too many guys around him that people are going to want to get to for Jason Day to be overly owned. So you're probably looking at sub 15% ownership, which would be great for leverage purposes in DFS. But even from the outright there at 40-1, I think it's a little bit disrespectful with the kind of track record he has around this golf course. Next up, we're going to our value plays towards the bottom end of the board, and we got Will Zalatoris here at $7,900. His Farmers record is one of the best in his small sample size, and a few weeks ago, I mean, before he withdrew from the event, everyone wanted to play Will Zalatoris. I mean, everyone was talking about trying to go out there and take him on their outright card, and then, of course, right before the event started, he pulled out of the event. Now, it could have been health related, which is always kind of scary on somebody like a Willie Z, but it also could have been like, hey, we know we're coming back here in a few weeks. I'm going to save my Torrey Pines out there for the signature event. I think that that is more than likely the situation that we're in, because if you take a look at the last 24 rounds, right, we zoom out, we take a look at how he's played, he's been doing solid things. I mean, gaining off the tee, gaining on approach. You take a look at the last 12 measured rounds, so we zoom in a little bit more, and he's still doing his thing across all four categories. He's not carrying his game with any one category, and the golf courses that historically he's played his best golf at are, of course, these major championship type of venues. Your Augusta National, finishing second as a rookie there, you know, having a lot of success at courses like the API, Memorial, that have some of the hardest scoring averages around the PGA Tour. When the ball strikers are funneling towards the top end of the board is when you see Will Zalatoris funneling towards the top end of the board. So kind of like an O'Bear, a Scotty, where I play them when conditions get their toughest. That's why I'm looking for a grinder like a Will Zalatoris, and I was able to get him at 50-1, which at the Farmers a few weeks ago would have just been absolutely unheard of for somebody like him. It is a stronger field now, so that's why we're getting the better number on him, but at DFS, where he doesn't have to win to get there, I like him even more. That top 5, top 10 equity is absolute gold over here in that 7K range, and if I'm going to play a Scotty Scheffler up there towards the top, maybe even take a double spend up out there with the studs and duds, you know, rather than taking an 8 and 9K guy, a Will Zalatoris, I think, has the same kind of win equity as a lot of these other 8, 9K guys, and he's going to save us a whole bunch of salary by jumping down here. So that's why I'm incorporating him into my player pool, and is also somebody I went out there and bet outright. Before we talk about our last two plays, our last two outrights of the week, I do want to remind you guys how you can get access to these sheets for yourself. If you've been wondering how to get all of my player pool, every single outright that I'm getting to, make sure to join my Patreon page. There's a link in the description of this video to go out there and join, and on there, everything that is blacked out will be completely uncensored. So that includes my entire 150 max pool, all of the ownership as that updates throughout the week. You can find all of that for just $15 a month there on my Patreon. It's not like you're being charged an arm and a leg for all the analysis that I'm doing, and it's giving you all the information not only for main slate for all these PGA Tour events, but also for showdown and rounds 2 through 4. So if you haven't already joined up, what are you waiting for? Go out there and check it out down there in the description of this video. But our next play is going to be Sahith Theegala at $7,500, and he's another example of one of these 7K guys that has the same kind of win equity as these 8 and 9K players. That's going to let you spend up for a double spend up if you want too. And at 75 to 1, I thought was worth taking for an outright because there at the Farmers was in consideration for me as well. He's the kind of player that plays well on this West Coast swing, one of the best POA putters that we have in the entire field. So that checks out at this sort of golf course. And he's also the sort of player that is hot and cold. So if you take a look at the last 12 measured rounds, you're going to see the cold part for Sahith. He's, losing in the 3 tee to green categories. You zoom out a little bit, it gets a little bit better for Sahith, but not all that much better. About a neutral with the 2 ball striking categories and then gaining with the 2 short game. But what you get with Sahith is when he's on, he's on. If he goes out there round 1, he shoots something like -4, -5 and is in contention, you can almost bet your ass that he's going to be there on a Sunday. And in DFS, where we're looking for high upside players with a wide range of outcomes, that is exactly what we're looking for. And the ball striking test, it fits his game as well. He's one of the longest players that we have in this range. And while he's not the most accurate player that we have on the PGA Tour, the fairway rate here is like 50-55%. Your Schefflers, your Auberts that are really straight off the tee might be able to beat that sort of average, but a vast majority of your players are living in that 30 to 50% range and just living with it because of how narrow those landing areas are. Sahith Theegala, by the way, his last time out last week, he drove the ball beautifully. He drove the ball a lot more accurate than what he's used to. I can tell you that because I was tracking it quite closely over there for some of the driving props and actually bet against his driving accuracy a few times, and he burned me because of how straight he was driving the ball. So I think that bodes well for his chances here. He's a really good putter on that surface, as you can see. And a few years ago at the Farmers Insurance Open, had a 4th place finish. Went out there, was in contention towards the very end. So though he doesn't have a massive sample size like guys like a J-Day who have won this, pretty much top 10 almost every time they've played here, he does have some elite tier performances though in that small sample size. So 75 to 1 took that for a little bit of a sprinkle this week, but in DFS, where I think he'll be lower owned, I think guys like a Sam Stevens, I think that your winner that week, Harris English at the Farmers, right, he'll be a lot more popular than Sahith Theegala. Sahith has a wider range of outcomes than those sort of players. Maybe not the best projecting play, like he's got a lower projection for sure than guys like a Stevens or an English. I can't give you the exact number, but it's quite significantly lower over there with the Sahith Theegala. But when you look at the ceiling score for all those different players, Sahith has by far the highest ceiling. And as a 150 max GPP player, that has a lot of utility to somebody like me. So outright market 75 to 1, that's self-explanatory, but in DFS, that wide range of outcomes comes in handy as well. And then finally, the last play we're going to go through here was an outright at 100 to 1, which I only sprinkled. It's not the main piece of exposure that I'm going to use for a Cam Davis, but in DFS at $6,800, he really fits what I'm looking for in a golfer. You want a par 5 score? He's got that down pat. Mid to long iron play? He's got that down pat as well, especially lately. He's been hitting his irons beautifully. And the main thing is he's a bomber long player off the tee. When the soft course that's going to play probably about 8,000 yards without the extra rollout, he's the kind of player that's not going to have a problem with that. He's one of the longest players that we have down here in the 6K range. And if you take a look at the form lately, he's been absolutely piping it off the tee, believe it or not, losing strokes to the field, which is kind of unheard of for a player as long as I'm off the tee. But the other categories from fairway in have been otherworldly. You're talking about gaining with approach play, which he can be a little bit inconsistent with, but gaining a bunch around the green and the putter is not what we're used to seeing from him. And if we go back to the last 24 measured rounds, you can see it kind of holds up. The off the tee is still into the negative, but gaining with his approach play in the 2 short game categories have been a lot more consistent than what we're used to seeing for him. So over here this week at a golf course that's going to be a big hitter's ballpark, I'm looking for high upside players. And just like a Sahith Theegala, if you're looking for safety, like you don't play a Cam Davis, you play him when you're looking for a lot of birdie production. You're looking for somebody that can outpace their placement position out there with their actual points scored. He makes a lot of birdies, a lot of eagles, gets you a lot of streaks over there in Draftkings. That's the exact kind of player that you're getting. And I did sprinkle him at 100 to 1 because the form is as good as we've ever seen for Cam Davis, but the course history is the one reason I wouldn't take him out there in single entries or cash. Those kind of builds, I'm looking for more sure players, and his course history here, while he's made almost every cut over here at Torrey Pines, he hasn't had more than, I think, a top 20 finish out of any of those starts. So not a huge course history sample size, like you'd say there with a Sahith or even guys like a Will Zalatoris, but a decent enough sample size, decent enough results to go out there and take him at 100 to 1. Alrighty guys, that is all I've got for the DFS and betting preview this week. Go ahead, smash that like button if you guys haven't already, and also subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the content to come. That'll of course include our Wednesday live stream at 7 p.m. Eastern, where you can toss any of the the questions you have down there in the chat, as well as all the content for Showdown and rounds 2 through 4. Those will be over there on the Ship It Nation YouTube channel. That's what we'll be touching on the fantasy and Showdown side of things. And then afterwards, we'll be over here on my channel, the one that you're watching right now, with the prop and betting side of things. So just like we've had here in 2025, we're going to keep it structured that way going forward. But make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any of that content when it's going live. And also comment down below who you've got as the winner for this golf tournament for a chance to earn a free month on my Patreon page, as long as they're at least 20 to 1 on books. And that means all the major books, okay? Look at the odds beforehand before you throw somebody down below. If you get somebody that's at least 20 to 1 to win, you will win a free month on my Patreon page. It'll be first come, first serve. So once a player's taken once, they cannot be taken again. So go ahead, give me your best mid to long shot to go out there and win this event. And if you end up getting the winner, you'll win a free month access over there to the Patreon. That, of course, is where I have all those projections I was mentioning before, my entire player pool, all the modeling out there for every single player. If you want that free of charge out there for the next month, go ahead, give me that guess down below. But that's all I've got over here for the video this week. Best of luck with all the exposure that you guys are getting to, and I'll see you guys for the Wednesday live stream at 7 p.m. Eastern time.